So amachnis moy, someone is gathering together his money for, he doesn't not all at once. He's gathering it together. V'amar harei elu l'shikli. These should be for my chiyuv of machzah shekel. And now you have extra. Beishama yoimrim moisron. The extra is not chulin. You can't use it for whatever you want. You have to go ahead and put it in the pushkaf and the dava. It'll be used when the mizbeach is slow. What we call kayetz hamizbeach. It'll be used for that. No, Maisron Chulin, the extra coins is Chulin. Elul Shikli, he only meant the Machzah shekel. This is similar to the concept of a Nazir. We have a machlokes in Beisham in Naziris Daf Lamed between Beisham and Beis Hillel, whether Hegdish B'toy Shmei Hegdish or not. According to Beis Shammai Shmei Hegdish, and according to Beis Hillel Lo Shmei Hegdish. That would be the difference. That would be a difference over there. Sha'av now, if he says Sha'avi mehen shikli, he says, I will bring from then my shkalim. In other words, he didn't say this is for my shekel. He said there's a pile, and from that pile I will bring my shkalim. Then Shavin, both Beis Hillel and even Beis Shammai, Sha'amoisa chulin, because again he's saying, I'm only bringing from the pile. I'm not saying the whole thing is shkalim. Mayhem, from them I'm bringing my shkalim. And Beis Shammai says, in that case, I agree that the extra will be chulin and you don't have to bring lin dava. What about the following scenario? Elul chatasi, he puts away coins that should be to purchase his carbon chatas. Shavim, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree. Shamois and dava. Here Beis Hillel will agree that the extra is not to be for chulin. It's the difference between Beis Hillel, between shkalim and chatas. Elu by shkalim is meiser chulin. Elu lechatas meiser is linadava. Sha'avi mehem chatasi. If he sets aside the coin and says again the keyword mehem, I will bring from them my chatas. Shavim shehamais chulin. They both agree that the extra would be chulin, because again, I didn't say the whole thing is kaidesh. Only I'll bring from among them. Amr Shimon, ma bein shkalim lechatas, loit Beis Hillel, right? What's the difference between this and chatas? Ella shel shkalim yesh them kitzva, ulechatas ein them kitzva. By shkalim there's a kitzva. So I'm gathering it up. As soon as I hit the chatzi shekel mark, the rest afterwards will be considered chulin. In other words, that's the amount. I don't need more than that. That's the gradation, right? Tonight, the share, 3.3, 5 point, be makbid on Kiddush, on tomorrow night. This shiurim, and anything above that is above the shir. So over here also, it's above the shir, therefore it's chulin. Mashe enkein chatas, there's no limit to how much you can spend on the chatas. But chatas ain't lo kitzvah. The chatas does not have a kitzvah. It does not have a set amount. Since the chatas does not have a set amount, then you can go ahead and spend. It doesn't have a set amount. Go ahead, and okay. So we have people coming in. Okay, great. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Af l'shkol me'lem kitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda says, guess what? The shekel also doesn't have a kitzvah. Why? Shekel she'ol Yisrael min hagoyla, when we came up from Bavel, hayushoiklin der konos. They would use as the machzas hashekel. They would use the darkoinos. A darkoin is 4 shkalim. It's 4 shkalim, meaning it's 8 times as much as the machzas shekel. Chazu lishkol slayim. They began to take 2 shkalim slayim. Chazu lishkol tavoyim, which is the machzas shekel. So biksha lishkol didarim. They wanted to go down to a dinar, which are a quarter of a shekel. Like kibbutz mehem didn't allow it. So you see, like Rabbi Yehuda, that the denomination of machzah shekel is lav dafka. It could even be more. Again, at times it was 8 times as much. At times 4 times as much. It says the Gemara Bikshu Rabbi Shimon Afal Pikain Yad Kulam Shava. No. The machzah shekel is the standard. The standard changes by what we use. In other words, if I saw a pshat, they were very poor when they came up. They needed more money. So therefore, machzah shekel was not enough. So they needed their koinos 8 times as much. They needed, 4 sloyim. They needed much more. So therefore, that's what they gave. And as they got wealthier, they went down from their koinos to sloyim to machzah shekel till they got to that standard. But it wasn't pshat that machzah shekel you could give a darkoin. It wasn't pshat machzah shekel you could give a selah. No, that's not pshat. Pshat is, it always was. The amount was the amount. It was set. Mashen came by chatos. No matter, you can give whatever you want to give. Chatos said maybe b'selav, is that maybe b'shleim, is that maybe shalish. So that's the difference. Okay, for those people who came in late, we're on Vav Amid Aleph. We're on Vav Amid Aleph. We saw a Mishnah. We saw Machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. If a person goes ahead and gives extra money, he's putting aside his money to accrue for Machzah Shekel. What happens if he has more than the Machzah Shekel? That extra money, what is it considered? Says by Shammai, it is linadava. It goes for the kayetz hamizbeach. You use it for carbon oil ice when the mizbeach is slow. And according to Beis Hillel, it is what? It is chulin. By chatos, Beis Hillel is maida, that the extra money would be for a carbon chatos. So hamachnis. Rabbi Yossi b'shem Reb Lazar. Again, Reb Lazar is Reb Lazar. In Yerushalmi, that aleph seems to check out once in a while. Rabbi Yossi b'shem Reb Lazar. Ma pligon. When do they argue? The machnis right. When they're going ahead and gathering prutos. They're gathering prutos to accrue the machzah shekel. Al ba'omer, if you would say elu l'shikli, one large pile of money, and you say these should be my shkalim, kuli alma maida shehamayis min adava. In other words, I can have two ways of having extra. I could go ahead and have piecemeal. I put in a pushka every day. And at some point I say, right, I take it out and I have more than a machzah shekel. There's the machlekes. But if I would have a pile of coins, and now I would say, right now, elu l'shikli, these should be for my shkalim, even Beis Hillel will be maida that the extra goes to Nedava. Because I said elu going on all of them. And therefore, Rabbi Elazar says it would go Linadava. That's what he wants to qualify the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Rabbi Chiyah, Rabbi Biba, b'shem Rabbi Elazar. So we have machlokes now between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Biba as to what Rabbi Elazar said. Ma palgina. When did they argue? The machnas prayed right. They argue when you're counting it up, accruing one by one. If you say these are my shkalim, right? These are my shkalim. These for the shkalim, so he disagrees with the opinion of Reb Yossi, and he says, and Reb says that even Beis Shammai would be maida if you have the Elu l'shikli, you say that's not hegdish b'toyis, and therefore it will be chulin. Imamish, they argue in that case. So Rav Chia, Mastisa Messiah Leil Rav Bibi, that they argue when they say Elu, they say when you're counting it up. That's when they argue. But when you say Elu l'shikli, then they will agree. Ditnan Amar Rav Shimon, Ma ben shkolim l'chatas, el shashkolim yesh lem kitzva, l'chatas ein lem kitzva. Right? Ma anan kayamim. When Rav Shimon said his din in the Mishnah, what was he speaking about? Again, in other words, Rav Shimon said it din in the Mishnah. There's a chilik between chatos and shkolim. What's the chilik? By chatos, there's no set amount, and by shkolim, there's a set amount. So, what exactly is that case? So, ma anan kayamin, and what are we speaking about that case? Rav Shimon. Im ba'omer sha'avi mehen shikli. If you say I'm going to bring the keyword being mehen from them. Everyone's maida. Again, I wasn't magdish the whole kit and caboodle. I just said mayhem from them. So from them, I'm going to bring a carbon what? A carbon chatas, a carbon shkalim. So therefore, everyone's maida. So that can't be the case that Rav Shimon was referring to. If you're going to say it's speaking sha'avi mayhem chatasi, that I will bring from them my chatas, mayhem again. Kol amma maida sha'maisa chulin. Ela Kain ani kama, kananam kayaman. This is what it's speaking about. But oimer, where you say, elu l'shikli, you're saying these are my shkalim. This exactly, that's the case. These are my shkalim, and in the case of these are my shkalim, that's when they seem to be what shkalim al yedei shkalim al yedei kitzvasim in atayra ma'isron chulin, right? And this would be a raya to Rav Bibi. That shkalim, that it's speaking elu l'shikli, and that's what Rav Shimon is saying, that the extra is chulin, which is the case of Rav Bibi. Because according to Rav Yossi, it was what? It was an Adava. Okay, one more time. The case of Eil L'Shikli, says Rav Yossi, even Beis Hillel will be Moedetz in the Dava. Says Rav Bibi, they argue in that case. Says Rav Bibi, they argue in that case. The Haraya they argue in the case is the Mishnah makes a distinction between Shkolim and Chatos. What's the distinction? Shkolim don't have a set amount, has a set amount, and Chatos doesn't have a set amount. If you're and I'm proving that the case of shekel is speaking where Eila L'Shikli. So Eila L'Shikli, in that case, they argue. Beis Shammai says Chulin. Beis Shammai says Nedava. Beis Hillel says what? Chulin. And Shimon says, why is Beis Shammai Hillel Moida by Chatos? Because it doesn't have a kitzvah, so the whole thing. So obviously you see that the argument Beis Shammai Beis Hillel is by Eila L'Shikli, like Rav Bibi, and not like Rav Yossi. Okay, so that's the raya. Elakana Nikayamin, what is it speaking about? Bo'omer Eila L'Shikli, Shkolim al Yidei shekitzvasim min haTorah mutar Ma'isron Chulin, Chatas al Yidei she'en kitzvasim min haTorah. There's no set amount. Ma'isron Nedava. Now, my overlay Rav Yossi b'shem Reb Lazar l'Chayra. Rabbi Yossi says that they agree that even Beis Hillel agrees by Eila L'Shikli that Yechayev, that Meiser is in the Dava. What does he do with the raya of Rav Bibi? It's a very good raya from the Mishnah, like Rav Bibi, that they argue by Eila L'Shikli. So what does Rabbi Yossi say? They don't argue. What does he do with the raya? It says Pasalah. He'll interpret it, right? Like he'll interpret it. The Machnis Proit Ukbeis Hillel. It's speaking what in a case where he went ahead and he's counting it, not Eila L'Shikli, he's counting one by one by one by one. And according to Beis Hillel, as soon as you got to the demarcation point of half a shekel, anything extra is l'chulin. And that's the distinction they're making between that case and chatos. Because in other words, guys, watch. Look, I'm counting my shkolim. Look, half a shekel, that's it, finished. Anything above chulin, my chatos. I'm putting money away. There's no point. There's no point. It doesn't stop. Memela, that's the difference between the two. But that's the way Rabbi Yossi would answer up, that Eila L'Shikli, Beis Hillel would be made that it's Linadava. V'hatanina Moshe Shkolim Chulin. Fred Gemara, how could you possibly say that Moshe Shkolim is Linadava? It says Moshe Shkolim Chulin, Kasha. So Pasloi b'machnas Peirik Beis Hillel. The same teretz. That's also speaking where you counted it up according to Beis Hillel. Next case. Hamafish Shikloi, someone separates his Shkolim. The Sabashu Chayev. In other words, he gave it already, and he's giving it again. He mistakenly gave it, and a person gets to a certain age, and they forget what they do. It's possible, it's possible. So he forgot the nimsa sheina chayev, and then he finds out the truth. So he separated. He gave his matzah shekel. He now separates it, and he sees the collector, and he says, "Hey, here's my matzah shekel." And he says, "What are you talking about? You gave already." What's the din? What's the din of that second matzah shekel? Is it kodesh or not? Right? Like kodesh, it's not kodesh. That's not kodesh. Hamafish shnayim. Let's say you separate two. V'savashu chayiv shnayim. You think you chayiv a full shekel, and you separated it. V'nimtza sheina chayiv ele echad only once. Oisei hasheni ma'avidlei. That second one, that second half of shekel. What's the din? So nishmana min hadal. Listen from this case. Hamafish chatasoi. Someone separates his korban chatos. V'savashu chayiv, and he thinks he's chayiv a chatos. V'nimtza sheina chayiv like kitcha. That's similar to someone separating what? His shekel, thinking he's mechuyev shekel, and he's not mechuyev. Hamafish shtayim. Someone separates two chatois. The savashu chayiv shtayim, and he thinks he's chayiv twice. V'nimtza sheina chayiv ela achas, and he finds he's only chayiv once. Oisa shniya my avilei. What does he do with that second chatos? Ela roya. He goes ahead and he grazes it, and it becomes l'ndava. Guys, halacha is like this. If you separate two chatois and you don't need one, so if you had, chatzah shekipper ba'aleha, that's speaking, then it would be mesa. But here you separated two, and now you have both in front of you, and you're bringing one. In that case, that second one, what do we do with it? Roya, we go ahead, put it in the pasture. It gets a mum, because you can't be paid the kache mizbeach without a mum. You paid it. The extra money now that you get will go, and you'll take that money and put it in the dava. So who I did over here? I separated 2 shkalim, 2 machzas a shekel. I did not need one of them, so it also goes to the dava. We're going to zushtel shkalim to chatas. Just like chatas, the extra that's unnecessary goes to the dava. So too over here, the shnayim, the extra half a shekel will go to the pushka linadava. That says the Gemara.
Rabbi Stern, I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
One is why wouldn't you apply that thinking to the first case of that we just brought, of that if he forgot that he gave already, and then he already separated some off for something for shkalim. So why wouldn't you put the same thought process that it would be?
In the first case, he wasn't chayiv at all. In the second case, he was chayiv. And he was chayiv.
Okay, and why wouldn't you say in the first case that once he's mafresh, it has to be held for the next year's machzas shekel? Because once we
don't go ahead and we don't do that. You have to give a new one next year. We saw yesterday's daf that we don't go from year to year. You have to give a new one.
Okay.
So says the Gemara. So l'chayri you have a tzushtel and an answer from chataswa to shkalim. So just like shkalim, just like chatas, the extra goes to nedava. So too over here, the extra would go li nedava. What can you say? It's more similar to saying elu. In other words, how can you say these fall in nedava? Guys, it should be, when he separates 2, it should be elu. It should be similar to elu l'shikli. And in the, why did Beis Hillel say in Mishnah elu l'shikli? That it goes l'chulin. Outside. Look at me outside. I know this Gemara is tedious. Hang in there. Listen. Main thing is you understand it. He's saying the following: 2 chatas at the same time, right? One you're gonna use, one's gonna go l'nedava. 2 shkalim at the same time, 2 half shkalim at the same time. One you're gonna use, one goes l'nedava. I could say 2 shkalim at the same time is the same thing as saying elu, a pile of money, l'shikli. What does Beis Hillel hold? If you have a pile of money and say these should be for my shekel, he says the extra goes l'chulin. So therefore, it should go l'chulin. It's not a good sushtel. Beautiful. The lashon is just hard. You know, the lashon of Yerushalmi they can pack a lot in a few words, and you have to. It's very, very hard. It's very, very hard. I really cheat. If you look, I have a Gemara. I use a very, very short abridged version, and I try to use it in conjunction with Chaim Kanievsky, Zalzain Gesundsein Sefer, to put it together, because the standard edition has so much words and so wordy and so long. So again, basically I cheat. Says the Gemara. Again, but you just have to understand it.
As long as you don't get caught, it's okay.
No. Rabbi Yehuda says the following. Now we said, guys, in the Mishnah, what did Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda said that it also doesn't have a kitzvah. He said at times they use much more expensive money. Their koinus were 4, slayim with 2, right? They use, so their koinus is dinarim, right? That's 4 dinarim. Chazu lishkol slayim, 2. Kishmayan. Chazu lishkol tebon. Now that's a half a shekel. Palge saloyim, a half a selah. Bikshu lishkol dinarim. They wanted to go down even more, which is karotin. Karotin is a quarter of a selah. So like kiblu aleihem, they did that. They didn't let them go down more than machzas a shekel, right? Min hada v'amadnu aleinu. Right, the pasuk says in the Chemya, v'amadnu aleinu mitzvahs losei shlishis hashekel b'shana la'avodas beis Elokeinu. The Shikla Yosef, what I use over here, says in that time the shlishis hashekel was the machzas shekel. At that time was the equivalent of the machzas shekel. The third of a shekel was the equivalent of the machzas shekel b'shas the mishkan. So now, from that fact that it said a shlishis hashekel at the time, this pasuk in the Chemya, we're going to derive a whole slew of halachas of 3. So very interesting halachas. Rabbi Chilki b'shem Rav Acha mikan shetzarach adam l'shalei shiklei gimel pam b'shana. A person has to give a shekel 3 times a year. Now, this means not a chiyuv machzis a shekel. This means a chiyuv of tzedakah. Mitoris tzedakah, you have to give 3 shekalim a year. That's what we learn from the third. But in a chinami, machzis a shekel is machzis a shekel once a year. Hadala yamit the asher lo yarbe. Mikan shein matrichen al atziba yosem migimel pan b'shana. You should be matriach to more than 3 times a year to give tzedakah. Amrabavim mikan. Now, guys, we're going to learn later on in the Mishnah the Trumas Halishka, when they would separate the money from the Fort Knox, they did it 3 times a year, using 3 baskets of 3 saw each. Again, the key word being a third. Yeah. Mikan legimel soyim, each basket was 3 soyim. Mikan legimel kupais, 3 baskets. Mikan legimel hafrashais, 3 separations. 15 days before Pesach, 15 days before Shavuos, and 50 days before Sukkot. Yigimel panim mishana. Amra vavim mikan legimel. Okay, we did that. Amra vavim mikan legimel soyin, mikan legimel kupais, mikan legimel afrashais. Ksiv. What does it say? Ze yitnu. It says ze yitnu. It says that this one you should give. Kol over al hapikudim. Right? Anyone who passes by the counters. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia, Chad Omar, Lefi shechatu b'machzis hayom. When did they sin the Schere Egel? At half the day. Yitnu machzis shekel, they give half a shekel. The Chad Omar one says, Lefi shechatu b'sheish shoyes b'yom. It says, Ish Moshe boishesh. Boishesh b'shosh sheish, when he was delayed. The key word being boishesh b'shosh sheish, Yitnu machzis shekel. Why? The Ovid Shisha Garmisin, which machzis shekel is made up of a coin called Garmisin, 6 of them. Doesn't seem to be there's a difference in halacha between the 2 of them of the machzis shekel. The question is how you derived it, whether you derived it from half the day or from the 6 hours and the 6 garmisim, which equals 2 a machzis shekel. Yeshua ben Bei Reb Nechemia b'shem Reb Yochanan and Zakkai lefisha avdu al aseres adibros. By the Cheda Egel, they were over in the aseres adibros. Yehei noisin kolechad v'yechad asara geira. Each person would have to give what? A 10th of a geira, right? A ganza shekel, a whole shekel has 20 geira. A whole shekel has 20 geira. So a machzah shekel has 10 geira. So therefore, we give, since the key word here being 10, the 10 geira versus the 10 commandments. Digressing to the mechira of Yosef. Yosef, guys, was sold for 20 silver denarim. There are 4 dinar to a seller. So Yosef was sold for 5 sloim, 5 times 4. That's why that's why we paid this up with 5 sloim. Rabbi Chayev, Rabbi b'shem Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, v'shemachru b'chayre shel Rachel be'esem kesef. It's interesting. They call the lashon b'char. They don't call him Yosef. They call b'char of Rachel. Fascinating, right? Never saw that in Bavli. They said that since they went ahead and they sold the b'char of Rachel for esem kesef, each one has to be used 20 pieces of kesef, which is 5 sloyim. The 4 into 20 is 5. Pinchas b'shem Rab Levi, l'fishamachru b'chayre shel Rachel be'esem kesef, v'nafol l'chalecha v'yachta mehem tabas. They sold Yosef. 10 brothers, only 10 brothers. Yosef wasn't counted. Binyam wasn't counted. So each one was 1/10 of 20. Which is what 1/10 of 20 is what is a taba, which is machzah shekel. Okay, so therefore you have a source for machzah shekel, some biblical sources. Amid Bey's new Mishnah. Ma'aser shkalim. This is what we said. We said Ma'aser shkalim. You have leftover shkalim. It goes to chulin. That was a kashan Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi said it's speaking about counting prutas according to Rabbi Hillel. Ma'aser esrim ha'efa. There's a in Vayikra Hey, last week's parsha, we went through two different averis that depending upon your monetary status, you're going to bring a different carbon. It's called the chatas oil of yored. The 2 averis were shvuas bitoy and tumas mikdash kadashav. Either one of those fellas, again, this is a good idea. That comes up a lot. Either one of those would require me being a korban chatas. Again, going to the Beis Hamikdash or shvuas pita, making a shvu and something just mevatas society, using just saying something gold is silver, vice versa. No, lahara lahativ. I said I'm going to eat something and I don't eat. Forget the silver and gold. I go ahead to eat. I don't eat. My lahara lahativ, good or bad. Now, so I'm a chayiv chatas. If I'm wealthy, I bring what? I bring a sheep. If I'm poor, I bring birds. If I'm very poor, I bring an asaris, I bring an asira se'efa. I bring a asira se'efa, a tenth of an efa as a korban chatas. That's silas. If I have any extra for that, moiser asira se'efa, the leftover of the asira se'efa that I set aside for my korban chatas, moiser kine zavim v'kine zavais. Again, they bring birds, 2 birds. V'kine yoladais, chatois v'ashamais, so extra money for chatas, extra money for asham. Moiser nedava, as we said in the last Mishnah, the extra chatas goes l'nedava. Again, when the mizbeach is slow. Any extra funds are going to go into the pushka l'nedava from all these kabbanis. Zeh klal, here's your rule of thumb. Kol shu bo l'shem chatas. Anything that's born as a korban chatas, umisham ashma, or anything that's born as a korban ashram, moiser nedava. However, there are kabbanis, guys. There are 2 kabbanis that you bring as a korban, as a, or actually 3 kabbanis, 2 blood kabbanis, you could bring as a neder and a dava. If you say it's upon me, I can bring an oila, or I can bring a shlamim, or I can bring a mincha, right? And those are kabbanis that are what? You bring ben neder and a dava. They're not a chiyav like a chatas, not a chiyav like an ashram. They're not a chiyav, not a sin offering, a guilt offering that I have to bring for a kapara. It's a korban that I want to bring to get close to Hashem. So an oila, a shlamim, or a mincha. So now, any leftover money I have oila goes to my korban oila. I'll bring another korban oila from it. Moise mincha, any money I've left over to purchase my korban mincha, the mincha is for another korban mincha I'll bring. Moise shlamim, any extra money l'shlamim will go l'shlamim. Moise pesach, any extra money or any extra animals, as we saw in Masechta Psachim, l'shlamim. That's the key. Any extra pesach is a shlamim. Automatically shlamim. A pesach, the rest of the day of years, is a shlamim. Moise nazirim. Now, let's say a nazir is a chiyav. He has to bring his karbanis. Let's say he's poor. So there was a fund in the Beis Hamikdash for the aniyim, for the poor nazirim. So any money that I set aside for nazirim, for the poor nazirim, l'nazirim, it will go for that nazir that needs it, and the next nazir that needs it, and the next nazir that needs it. And it's going to stay within the realm of naziris. However, an individual who's able to go ahead independently and purchase his kabbanis, and he has extra money, Moisa Nazeh Linidava. Moisa Nazeh will be Linidava. It's similar in a way to Chatas V'Asham, guys, because it's a Chiyuv. You have to bring it. You have to bring the korban naziris, right? So it's similar in that way, and therefore it's Linidava. So it's that theme that goes throughout a Chiyuv, the extra is Linidava. If it's not a Chiyuv, then it will stay within the realm of whatever you're going to use it for. Guys, are good? Okay. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Yossi, at the Onotamon, while we were still there, we were still in Bavel, Shemias Kal Rabbi Yehuda Shol the Shmuel. We heard the voice of Rabbi Yehuda who is Shmuel. This is Rabbi Yehuda, this is Shinana, the sharp one, the famed Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, who learned by Rav, and after the Patira Rav, he went to learn by Shmuel. So he's quoted now in Yerushalmi. So we heard Rabbi Yehuda Shol the Shmuel, Hifrish Shikla Yomes. The guy separates his shekel, and he consequently dies. Amalei, why did Shmuel tell Rabbi Yehuda? Yiplu l'nedava. It's going to go l'nedava. Moisa asira se'efa shaloi. What about the extra asifa efa shaloi of the Kohen Gadol? Every day, guys, the Kohen Gadol will bring a minchas chavitin. He'd bring a korban minchas chavitin once in the morning and once in the afternoon. Let's say he had extra moisa of that minchas chavitin, and that was bought also from asira se'efa. So minchas moisa asira se'efa, the extra of asira se'efa shaloi. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, Yalichem liyam melach. You go ahead, you throw it into the Yam Melech. In other words, you destroy it. You don't use it. Rabbi Loza Omer, Yiplu Nedava. He says it falls in Nedava. Now, so Rabbi Yochanan says it goes L'ruach, and Rabbi Loza says it goes Nedava. Now, our Mishnah also discussed Asir Se'efa, and it says what? That's Yiplun Adava. It's not Yiplun, it doesn't go to the Yam HaMelach. So the Gemara, again, we know the answer. Our Mishnah is speaking about the Asir Seifa of a Chatas. This is speaking about the Asir Seifa of a Minchas Chavitin. It's two different animals, if you will. And Masha'en came in the Kasha, they held it was the same thing. So it's the Gemara, yes. Masnisam pligi al Rabbi Yochanan, right? Because our Mishnah says, Moiser Shkalim Chulin, Moiser Asir Seifa, Moiser Kinei Zavim, Kinei Zavais, Moiser Kinei Yolis, Kachatas Veshamas, Moiser Nedava. And it doesn't go to Liyam HaMelach, the Asir Seifa. And for the Gemara, my overlay Rabbi Yochanan, what does Rabbi Yochanan do with our Mishnah? So again, Pasalah, he interprets our Mishnah. It's speaking, Moisa Asir Seifa shel Minchas Chayte shel Kol Yisrael. Why is it goes on the Dava? Because in fact, it's a Karban Chatas. And every Karban Chatas goes on the Dava. Masha'en Kain, the Minchas Chayin Gadol, Minchas Chavitim, there is no such other Mincha in the realm of Karbanis. Therefore, if it's extra, it doesn't go the next day. Next day is probably nicer. You go ahead, but not nicer. It's why don't you use it for the next day? Why Liyam HaMelach? That I would have to know why. That I didn't know much, right? I don't know. Again, it has kedusha, I guess. You know what? I think that it has kedusha, and therefore we want to ensure that it does have meila and it goes to the Yam HaMelech. I'm not sure exactly. I'd have to do research on that. But again, vis-a-vis pshat in the Gemara, you have pshat in the Gemara. It's a little easier than yesterday's daf or the Amid Aleph. Now, Rabbi Yossi says, "Al da on this olul Abba bar ba." On this was question. Abba bar ba asked the question. The Ino Amrinon in Bnei Bavel Amrin minayin shah Pesach mishtan l'shem shlamim. You have a korban Pesach, right? Now, guys, here's the key: a korban Pesach. The rest of the days of the year, if you bring it as a korban Pesach, it's puzzle, because the amount of the korban Pesach is what tomorrow. The amount of korban Pesach would be Yud Dalet. You can't bring it before. So if you separate your Pesach in September and you brought it in September or October, November, l'shem Pesach, it will be puzzle. L'shem Shlamim, it will be a Shlamim. Okay, that's the key. Minayin shah Pesach mishtan l'shem Shlamim. How do you know Pesach changes to a Shlamim? The pasuk says, "Kol shehu min atzoyin," right? Anything that is from the tzoyin, bo shlamim. Tzoyin is small livestock, such as goats and sheep. The korban Pesach, kol min, anything min. Let's say l'rabbis tzoyin will be marba. Anything that's tzoyin, you bring what as a shlamim. Kol shehu min atzoyin, bo shlamim. That's what the pasuk says. So since the korban Pesach, guys. So this is the pasuk. Kol shu min atzoyin ba shlamim. Darshan, since the korban Pesach only comes from tzoyin, therefore it's a shlamim. Hisvan. So Rabbi Abba bar ba asked, Hari oila min atzoyin. An oila comes from tzoyin, and what's an extra oila the rest of the days of the year? It's an oila. It's not a shlamim. It's not a shlamim. It's an oila. So if you want to say that anything that's extra mitzayin that becomes a shlamim, so extra Pesach becomes a shlamim, an extra oila also should be a shlamim, but an extra oila is an oila, and it comes from mitzayin as well. So your drasha says Rav Aber Baba, I don't understand your drasha. Automatically a tzayin is a shlamim. You see here a shlamim, a tzayin is an oila. And for the Gemara, dava she'ena ba elamin at tzayin. Yatsa oila sheiba afilu min abakar. You know, very distinction. A korban shlamim, what? A korban Pesach is only bought from tzayin, so therefore it automatically becomes a shlamim. An oila can be bought from tzayin, and an oila can be bought from bakar. Since it can be bought from both, it doesn't automatically become a shlamim. Yes, Maish.
Oh, you can bring a korban Pesach from a goat.
That's a tzayin.
Tzayin is a sheep.
No, tzayin is sheep and goat. Sheep and goat. Tzayin means small livestock. Last week's parsha is vim eis karbanoi, right? Im kesev karbanoi, vim eis karbanoi, right? Both underneath the category of tzayin. And we had a whole drush in Masechet Pesachim. It was extra the eis because of that, because it's included in tzayin. Okay, says the Gemara. Hayisvan is another question. Guys, you good so far? Okay, let's chazar riba. We went. Our Mishnah said that a Pesach, the rest of the day years is Shlomim. We have where do you know that from? We have a pasuk v'minat soin. So anything that comes from soin is a Shlomim. For the Gemara, an oil comes from soin, and for the Gemara, an oil comes from bakar also. It's not automatically a Shlomim. Continuing on, questioning on that line of reasoning, says Hayisvan Hari Asham. Okay, there's an Asham. An Asham, guys, comes only from an ayil. An Asham is a male sign. An Asham the rest of the year is not a Shlomim. Amarav Boyin Barkana Minat Sign Davashu Ba Mikol Sign from all sign. Yatsa Asam Sheina Ba Elaminha Elim Bilvad. Minat Sign means any type, right? Minat Sign means any type, but a carbon asham is only brought what from a male ram. B'cholasa at oimer, Fred Gemara Kasha, anytime b'cholasa v'asa, right? Anytime at oimer min, it's lamayit. When you say min, it's an exclusion to diminish. The kan amamar min l'rabbis. You're saying min at sign to include either the carbon pesach or to include, according to Rashi and Zvachim, to include bein izim, bein kfasim, both, right? So in other words, the basic question being, min is not a meat over here, it's an inclusion. So Amarav Mona, hachanami min lemayit, because miyat she'ena ba ben beishtanim, a pesach is can't be bought 2 years old, only 1 year old. Miyat she'ena ba nekeva, it can't be bought as a female, it only can be bought as a male. Okay, the Gra takes out the next few lines. Gemara, Hayisvan, go to Hayisvan. Hayisvan is to go ahead and ask. Hayisvan, v'kasiv v'im minat soin karbanoi, minat kvasim ay minat izim, la'oila, mi'ata maisa pesach ba'oila, and you said that what? Maisa pesach is a shlamim. So Rav Oven, mashnin davash, no, it's a question, it should be an oila. We're asking, if your limud is minat soin min shlamim, I have a limud minat soin that it should be an oila. So why did you opt? Guys, it's directional now. View my head as the word minat soin. I have one min shlamim and oila. Why do you opt to go in the shlamim direction rather than the oila direction? Good. So the Gemara is going to go ahead and say that right now. Miyata Maisa Pesach ba'oila, question mark. Rav Avon, Mashnin Dava Shehula Achila. I'll change Pesach, which is edible, to something I can eat. L'Dava Shehula Achila Shlamim. Ve'ein Mashnin Dava Shehula Achila l'Dava Shnein La'achila. I have a choice. As of current Pesach, it's edible. I can go to the Shlamim direction to an edible, or I can go the oila direction to an inedible. I'd rather go to the Shlamim direction that has more in common, the fact that you could eat it, rather than in the oila where you can't eat it at all. That's the reason the Iminat Soin should be referring to what? The Shlamim rather than what? Than the oila. Good? Amar Rabbi Yosi bar Boin. He also makes a chilik. Why to go into the direction of shlamim rather than the direction of oila? Mishanin koshim kalim, l'shem koshim kalim. A pesach's koshim kalim, a shlamim's koshim kalim. A mishanin koshim kalim, l'shem koshim kedoshim, rather than go in the direction of what of an oila, which is a koshim kedoshim. So I'm not going to go ahead and upgrade minat soin from a shlamim, from a pesach to an oila. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Al Da Olu Reb Chanina, right? And this Reb Chanina had a question. The Inu Omrin, Eina Pesach Mishtana L'Shem Shlamim, Elim Kain, Shachtu L'Shem Shlamim. Only if you shecht it L'Shem Shlamim. If you shecht the Pesach L'Shem Shlamim, then it's a Shlamim. V'ani Omer, Afilu L'Shachtu L'Shem Oila. Even if you shecht L'Shem Oila, it should be what? A Shlamim. Even if you shecht it L'Shem Oila, it should be a Kosher L'Shlamim. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. So Amar Rabbi Loi, Taima the Rabbi Yochanan. What's the reason Rabbi Yochanan says if I shecht a Pesach as a shlamim, as an oila, it should be a shlamim. In minat soin karbanoi lezevach hashlamim. If from the soin is his carbon lezevach hashlamim. Kol shu zevach ba shlamim. Anything that's a zevach ba shlamim, even if you shechted l'shem oila, it's kosher l'shlamim. Right? So in other words, it's any carbon that you bring l'chol zevach that you shech, that's a koch that l'chor it's a pesach. it's a tzoin, it's a Pesach, automatically becomes a shlamim. Even if you shechted it what? L'shem oila. Very, very strange halacha. Umishtanen l'machshava, now Merzes Akasha. What about now? Umishtanen l'machshavas psul heyech avida. What would happen is if he would have now, right now, guys, let's go outside. He's shechting it with a machshava of a kosher carbon, an oila, but it's coming a shlamim. What happens if what happens? What happens if he would go ahead, have a machshava of pigel, and he shechts it? Does it automatically become ois? Says the Gemara. Here's the kasha. Shachtu l'shem oila. He shechted as an oila. So, guys, if he didn't do anything else, automatically it's a shlamim, right? That's what you just said. Like you, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina. If you shechted a Pesach l'shem oila, it becomes a shlamim. What happens if I shechted the Pesach l'shem oila to sprinkle the dam the next day, which is a machshava of pigel? Now, shachtu l'shem oila al manas lizrek doimel l'macha mikol makam pasel hu, right? Nonetheless, it should be pasel. Meaning, in tema mishtan l'machshava pasel. If you're going to say what? If it changes to a machshava of pasel, or ein tema ein mishtan l'machshavas pasel pigel. Okay, here's what it means outside. Do we say that when I shechted this carbon Pesach as a carbon oila with the machshava to sprinkle it, right? Do we say that the carbon's going to be pasel either way? The question is, do we say that in pigel, in order for something to be pigel, it means that's the only game in town? So I had to shecht it, a carbon, l'shem what? I had to shecht it l'shem, regular case of pigel. I'm shechting an oila for an oila with the machshava to sprinkle the dam the next day. That's my shchita. My Kabbalah is the Shem Oila. My halacha is the Shem Oila. I do everything correctly. You can't screw up anything else. That's the din by Pesach, by Pigel. You can't have any other mess up whatsoever. So over here, here's the Shaila. I shechted an Oila. I shechted a Pesach, the Shem Oila. That's one mess up. And I went ahead and also had the Zrika of the second mess up to do the Pigel. Do we say that since automatically it becomes a shlamim, it's only one pigel, it's only one mess up and it's pigel? Or do we say it's two mess ups and it's not pigel? That's the shaila. According to you, Rabbi Yosef Yochanan, you're shechting a carbon shlamim. You're shechting the carbon shlamim for the purpose of being an oila, and we say automatically it becomes a shlamim. Do we say who adin by pigel, it's gone? Or do we say no? Do we say that it's not? So the lashon of Yerushalmi, ein tema mishtan l'machshavas psul. Does it go ahead and change to a machshava of pasul? If it changes to a machshava, if it changes to a machshava of pasul, guys, if it changes to a machshava of pasul, therefore it's out of the ballpark. Because why? Because you have two mess ups over here. One psul, two pigel. Or ein tema ein machshtan l'machshavas pasul. Or don't we say it's not considered? It's considered a kasha oila, a kasha shlamim, and have a psul pigel. The Gemara doesn't answer that shaila. Next shaila, l'shmoi u'shaloi l'shmoi. Now, again, I shechted a Pesach l'shmoi during the year. It's pasul. I shechted shaloi l'shmoi. It's a shlamim. So now I have in shchita. I have two machshavos. I shechted l'shmoi u'shaloi l'shmoi. I'm shechting it l'shem Pesach, which is no good because it's pasul. I'm shechting shaloi l'shmoi, which is good. It talks to me kosher. B'shayim asashana. Rabbi Bun bar Chia b'shem Shmuel bar Abba Mekimin she'ein lo shem nasa kishachler l'shmoi u'shaloi l'shmoi b'shtika v'u kasha. So he says a very, very, very fascinating pshat. He wants to kind of the following. He wants to say that since the Korban Pesach, the last part of the shechita, you shechted it shaloi l'shma, that automatically becomes a shlamim. So therefore, I'll view is if I shechted the whole thing b'shtika and it's good. So in other words, if I would have just stopped, my first machshava was lishmoi, which is Pesach, which is puzzle. It would have been out of the ballpark. But I concluded it with what? The machshava of shaloi lishma, which is a shlamim, says Rabbun, it goes ahead and takes out the first machshava. It's b'shtika, and therefore it's a kosher carbon. So Amalei, they said to Rabbun, Imkenu, if you say such a thing, afilu shachtu lishmoi, if you shechted the carbon Pesach, lishmoi, which is no good, almanas lizroi damai shaloi lishmoi, on the purpose of going ahead and throwing its blood shaloi lishmoi, yasem mishor rishoyna kishaychte lishmoi shaloi lishmoi. You should, right? We should go ahead and say that it should be kasha. We should go ahead and say that we take out the machshava of pigel and it's kasha. So Amrav Abba Mari, so he says, minolim b'shtika kasha. How do you know that what? That shtika, if you throw the blood, that it's kasha, dilim b'shtika pasal. Maybe if he goes ahead and he throws it in b'shtika, maybe it's pasal. Maybe it would be pasal. I'm not exactly sure what I'm saying. So I guess we can do two things. We can cut it here. I'll make it up Meister Shabbos, or give me a second on hold and let me try to figure it out. We're in business. Okay, guys, what are we comparing? We're saying the following. I shechted it lishmai, which is no good. Pesach lishmai. I then changed it shaloi lishma. We're going to view it as if I didn't go ahead and say the lishmai and it's going to be good. Fred the Gemara, let's do the same thing by pigel. Let's say, just like by pigel, right? But let's say the same thing by pigel. He shechted lishmai, take out the pigel part, and it should be a good carbon, and take out this rika part. So the Gemara concludes and says, you can't make that comparison. Maybe, right? Maybe by pigel, that shtika is not going to help. Over here, you verbalized it. You said, I'm shechting lishmai. I'm also shechting shaloi lishmai. When I verbalize it, then I'll create the shtika on the first part. Masha'en came where I didn't verbalize anything. It was all b'machshava. Ken Zayin will be puzzle. The distinction between, again, when I shechted it lishmai and l'shaloi lishmai, we'll say that the machshava shaloi lishmai overrides the first one. We'll view the first one as shtika, even though he verbalized it. The second case, you're saying you shechted it shaloi lishmai, and then you had the machshava of pigel. Let's do away with the machshava of pigel. Maybe you can't do away with the machshava of pigel. The shtika by pigel is not similar to the shtika by what? By shaloi lishmai. By lishmai. By the lishmai, when I shechted it as a Pesach, the same time I said lishmai, I said shaloi lishmai. And then I'll view it, it'll be a virtual shtika. Mashenkin here was an actual shtika, maybe we won't say that it should be kasha. So therefore you can't go ahead and sushtel the two. I wish everyone a chag kosher v'sameach.